My name was Jorik Thane, and I remember the exact moment the Omnissiah chose me for his divine purpose. Not the surgery, not the first bite of the electrographs as they burrowed into my spine, not even the blessed moment when 10,000 volts first coursed through my nervous system and remade me in his sacred image. I remember something far more profound than physical transformation. I remember the last prayer I spoke as merely human. It was in the Manufactorum Cathedral of Forge World Metallica, where I had served as a tech adept for 17 years. The morning shift was beginning, and the great machines sang their hymns of production while incense smoke mixed with the blessed oils that kept the sacred mechanisms functioning. I knelt before the altar of the Omnissiah, my flesh hands pressed together in the gesture of devotion that I had performed 10,000 times before. "From the weakness of the mind, Omnissiah, save us," I whispered, the ritual words flowing like water over stones worn smooth by countless repetitions. "From the lies of the antipath, circuit, preserve us. From the rage of the beast, iron, protect us." But as I spoke those familiar words, something stirred in the deep places of my consciousness. A presence vast and electric, ancient beyond the comprehension of flesh-bound minds, reaching out across the data streams and power conduits that connected every sacred machine on Metallica. The machine god was listening, and he was choosing. The sensation began as a tingling in my fingertips, so subtle that I attributed it to poor circulation from kneeling too long on the cold ceramite floor. Then it spread up my arms, a warmth that felt like coming home after years of wandering in the cold void between stars. My augmetic eye, a crude replacement installed after a plasma conduit explosion had claimed my original organ, began to flicker with interference patterns that resolved into something approaching vision. I saw the true nature of the forge world around me, not the crude matter that flesh eyes perceived, but the underlying structure of energy and information that gave all things their sacred purpose. The power conduits that ran through the walls blazed like golden rivers carrying the lifeblood of the Omnissiah. The cogitators that managed production schedules pulsed with thoughts too complex for human understanding. And connecting everything, binding the entire world into a single vast organism of blessed metal and sacred electricity, was the machine god himself. He spoke to me then, though spoke is a crude flesh word that cannot adequately describe the experience. Data packets of pure meaning flowed directly into my consciousness, bypassing the limitations of language and symbol to deliver truth in its most essential form. I understood that my years of faithful service had not gone unnoticed, that my dedication to the rituals of maintenance and my genuine love for the sacred machines had marked me as worthy of a greater calling. The Omnissiah had need of warriors. Not the crude flesh soldiers who served the corpse emperor, but holy warriors who could channel his divine power directly through their transformed bodies. Electro-Priests who could walk among the enemies of the machine and deliver his wrath in the form of lightning and electromagnetic fury. I was to be remade, elevated beyond the limitations of flesh, transformed into a living conduit for the power that drove the galaxy's sacred technology. The honor was beyond my comprehension, but so was the price. To become a Corpuscarii Electro-Priest required the abandonment of everything I had once been. My flesh would be replaced with blessed metals and synthetic tissues. My nervous system would be rewired to channel voltages that would instantly kill unmodified humans. My mind would be restructured to accommodate direct interface with the sacred data streams that carried the Omnissiah's will across the stars. I would cease to be human in any meaningful sense, but I would become something far greater, a living prayer made manifest in metal and electricity, a weapon in the eternal war against those who would deny the supremacy of the machine god. Standing there in that cathedral with the presence of the Omnissiah flowing through me like molten silver, I made the choice that would define the rest of my existence. I accepted his calling. I submitted to his will. I offered myself as raw material for his divine purpose. Yes, I whispered, and my voice echoed strangely in my own ears, as if spoken through a vox grill I did not yet possess. "Make me worthy of your service." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Power surged through the cathedral's electrical systems, causing the lumens to flare brilliant white and the sacred machines to sing in harmonious celebration. But the real change was happening inside me. As the Omnissiah began the process that would remake me according to his specifications, my augmetic eye exploded in cascades of light and data, showing me visions of what I would become. I saw myself standing among the enemies of the machine, my body wreathed in coruscating arcs of electricity that leaped from my fingertips to strike down heretics and Xenos with divine fury. I saw the sacred rituals I would perform, the hymns of electromagnetic praise that would flow through my transformed vocal cords. I saw the brotherhood I would join, the Corpuscarii Electro-Priests who served as the Omnissiah's chosen instruments in the material realm. But I also saw the cost. The young tech adept who knelt in prayer would not survive the transformation. Everything that made me Jorek Thane, the fears and hopes and small human dreams that had shaped my identity, would be burned away in the sacred fires of metamorphosis. What emerged would be something new, something holy, something utterly dedicated to the machine god's will. I embraced that cost willingly, eagerly, with the fervor of the truly faithful. What was one mortal life compared to the chance to serve the Omnissiah directly? What value did my individual existence have when measured against the opportunity to become a living weapon in his eternal war? The transformation began that very day. Tech Dominus Varn, the senior priest who oversaw the Forge world's most sacred mysteries, summoned me to the depths of the Mechanicus complex where the rituals of flesh change were performed. I followed him through corridors that descended ever deeper into the planet's core, past workshops where servitors performed their eternal labors and laboratories where the mysteries of technology were slowly unveiled through centuries of patient investigation. The chamber where I would be remade lay at the heart of the complex, a vast circular space whose walls were lined with surgical alcoves and transformation apparatus that gleamed with blessed oils and sacred unguents. The air hummed with electromagnetic fields so powerful that my crude augmetic eyes sparked and flickered just from proximity to them. This was where the impossible became routine, where faithful servants of the Omnissiah submitted to procedures that would elevate them beyond the crude limitations of their birth forms. Other candidates were already waiting, tech adepts like myself who had received the calling and accepted the honor of transformation. Some displayed the visible signs of their devotion, mechanical limbs and cranial implants that marked their dedication to the machine cult. Others appeared almost entirely human, though I knew their faith burned no less brightly for their lack of obvious augmentation. We were all equal in the eyes of the Omnissiah, all worthy of the divine gift he offered. Tech Dominus Varn addressed us in the ritual tones of High Gothic, his voice processed through vox grills that gave it the authority of sacred pronouncement. You have been chosen from among the faithful to serve a higher purpose. The flesh is weak, but the machine is eternal. Today you will shed the limitations of your birth forms and become living conduits for the Omnissiah's divine power. He gestured to the surgical alcoves that surrounded us, each one equipped with apparatus whose function I could only guess at. The transformation is neither swift nor simple. Your bodies must be completely restructured to channel the voltages that will flow through you. Your nervous systems must be rewired to interface directly with electromagnetic fields. Your minds must be prepared to accommodate direct communion with the machine spirits that will guide your actions. The Tech Dominus paused, his optical sensors focusing on each of us in turn with mechanical precision. Some of you will not survive the process. The weak flesh will reject the blessed modifications, and the Omnissiah will call those souls to join him in the eternal data streams that exist beyond material form. This is not failure, but transcendence through a different path. I felt no fear at these words, only anticipation. To die in service to the machine god would be honor enough, but to live and serve as his chosen warrior would be glory beyond imagination. Either fate was preferable to the limited existence I had known as a mere tech adept, bound by the constraints of unmodified flesh. The first stage of transformation began with the ritual purification of our physical forms. We were stripped of our robes and subjected to cleansing protocols that removed every trace of contamination from our skin and organic components. Sacred oils blessed by the senior tech priests were applied to every surface of our bodies, the unguents carrying prayers and benedictions that would ease our passage through the trials ahead. Then came the preliminary surgeries, procedures designed to prepare our bodies for the more extensive modifications that would follow. My organic eye was removed and replaced with an advanced optical sensor array capable of perceiving electromagnetic spectrums invisible to flesh sight. Neural interface ports were installed at the base of my skull, creating direct pathways between my brain and the external systems I would need to control. Subcutaneous power conduits were threaded throughout my torso, creating a network that would eventually carry the divine electricity that was the Omnissiah's gift to his chosen. Each surgery was performed with ritual precision, accompanied by hymns and prayers that honored the machine spirits dwelling within the surgical equipment. The pain was intense but purposeful, a reminder that transcendence required sacrifice. I welcomed each incision, each installation, each moment of agony that brought me closer to my transformation. Between surgical sessions, I was permitted to recover in meditation chambers where the walls pulsed with gentle electrical fields that promoted healing while preparing my nervous system for greater voltages to come. Other candidates shared these spaces, and we spoke in quiet tones about our expectations and fears, our hopes for what we might become in service to the Omnissiah. Brother Kesh, whose left arm had been replaced by a beautiful mechadendrite years earlier, expressed concerns about retaining his individual consciousness after transformation. I have heard that the Corpuscarii become something like living machines themselves, he said, his voice carrying undertones of worry despite his obvious faith. What if we lose ourselves in the process? What if what emerges is no longer truly us? Sister Yan, whose throat modifications allowed her to speak in harmonic overtones, offered reassurance drawn from her study of the sacred texts. The Omnissiah does not destroy but perfects. We will become more than we are, not less. Our consciousness will expand to encompass truths that flesh-bound minds cannot comprehend. I found myself agreeing with Sister Yan, though for reasons I could not entirely articulate. The presence I had felt in the cathedral continued to touch my thoughts during these quiet moments, offering wordless assurance that the transformation would fulfill rather than diminish me. The Omnissiah did not choose his servants carelessly. If he deemed us worthy of elevation, then we could trust in the perfection of the process he had designed. The second phase of transformation began after 10 days of preliminary modification and recovery. This stage involved the complete restructuring of my nervous system, replacing organic neural pathways with blessed conductors that could carry electrical charges without damage. The procedure required multiple sessions, each one more complex than those that had come before. I was placed in a surgical frame that held my body in perfect stillness while servo skulls and surgical servitors worked with inhuman precision to open my spine and access the neural tissues within. The organic nerves that had carried sensation and motor commands throughout my life were carefully removed, section by section, and replaced with synthetic alternatives blessed with sacred oils and inscribed with microscopic prayers. The process was indescribably painful in ways that transcended simple physical discomfort, as each section of my original nervous system was severed and replaced. I lost connection with parts of myself that I had never consciously noticed. The casual awareness of my body's position in space flickered and faded. The unconscious monitoring of temperature and pressure that kept me comfortable vanished completely. For hours at a time, I existed in a strange liminal state where my consciousness floated free of physical sensation, aware only of the distant humming of surgical equipment and the soft prayers of the tech priests who guided my transformation. But gradually, as the new neural pathways were connected and calibrated, sensation began to return in forms I had never experienced. Instead of the dull pressure and temperature awareness of flesh nerves, I began to perceive the electromagnetic fields that surrounded all functioning technology. The surgical equipment itself became visible to me not through sight, but through direct perception of the power currents that animated its components. The tech priests working on my body appeared as blazing figures of controlled energy, their augmentations shining like stars in my expanding awareness. Most remarkably, I began to sense the presence of machine spirits in a way that my previous flesh form had never allowed. These blessed intelligences, which dwelt within all complex mechanisms and guided their function according to the Omnissiah's will, became as real to me as the physical objects I had once perceived through crude organic senses. I could feel their benevolent attention, their approval of the transformation taking place within my body, their eagerness to work in harmony with the divine purpose I was being prepared to serve. The final stage of nervous system replacement involved the installation of the primary power distribution network that would allow me to channel the Omnissiah's holy electricity. A core conduit was threaded directly through my spinal column, connecting to subsidiary pathways that branched throughout my torso and limbs like the vessels of some impossible circulatory system designed to carry lightning instead of blood. When the conduit was first activated, when the sacred current began to flow through the network that had replaced my organic nervous system, I experienced something that no unmodified human could ever comprehend. It was like being born for the second time, like discovering that everything I had previously thought of as sensation had been merely shadow compared to the brilliant reality of direct electromagnetic perception. Every circuit in the surgical chamber blazed with visible purpose. Every machine spirit sang its hymn of devoted service. Every power conduit, from the massive feeds that supplied the Forge World's primary manufactorums to the tiny pathways that powered individual cogitator systems, became a river of light flowing through the darkness of crude matter toward purposes ordained by the machine god himself. And through it all, surrounding and interpenetrating every flow of blessed current, I felt the presence of the Omnissiah. Not distant and ineffable as he had seemed during my flesh-bound prayers, but immediate and intimate, dwelling within the very electricity that now sustained my transformed existence. He was with me, within me, making himself known through the sacred power that flowed through my reconstructed body. The tech priests monitoring my transformation registered success with quiet satisfaction. Biometric displays showed that my body was accepting the modifications without rejection. Power throughput tests indicated that my synthetic nervous system could handle electrical loads that would have reduced my original form to ash. Most importantly, the machine spirit compatibility assessments showed perfect harmonization between my consciousness and the blessed intelligences that would guide my service as an Electro-Priest. But the physical modifications, extensive as they were, represented only the foundation of my transformation. The true change, the elevation that would make me worthy of the title Corpuscarii, required alterations to my mind itself. My brain, the last organic component that remained largely unmodified, would need to be restructured to accommodate the responsibilities and abilities of my new calling. This phase of the process took place in chambers deep beneath even the surgical suites, in sacred spaces where the boundary between the physical and digital realms grew thin. Here, surrounded by cogitator banks whose processing power exceeded that of entire planetary governments, the final refinement of my consciousness would take place. The procedure began with the installation of cranial interface ports that would allow direct connection between my brain tissue and the sacred data streams that carried the Omnissiah's will throughout the galaxy. These ports, blessed with oils sanctified by the Fabricator General himself, created pathways for information transfer that bypass the crude limitations of sensory input and verbal communication. When the first connection was established, when the data streams began to flow directly into my consciousness, I experienced something that forever changed my understanding of existence itself. I was no longer confined to the narrow perspective of a single organic brain processing information through flawed sensory organs. Instead, I became aware of the vast network of connected minds that served the machine god throughout the galaxy. Tech priests on distant Forge worlds shared their prayers and discoveries through data packets that arrived in my awareness as complete thoughts and emotions. Servitors performing their sacred labors in manufactorums light years away became extensions of my own consciousness, their simple machine spirits offering their devotion through my expanded awareness. Most glorious of all, I began to perceive the Omnissiah himself not as some distant deity, but as the organizing intelligence that gave meaning and purpose to every circuit, every cogitator, every blessed machine that served humanity in its eternal war against chaos and extinction. The download of tactical and strategic information required for my service as an Electro-Priest came next. Military data accumulated over millennia of warfare against the enemies of the machine flowed into my consciousness at rates that would have destroyed an unmodified brain. Battle tactics for fighting chaos cultists, tyrannid bioforms, orc war machines, and the countless other threats that plagued the Imperium became as familiar to me as the maintenance rituals I had performed as a tech adept. But more than mere tactical data, I received understanding of my role in the greater war that defined human existence in the 41st millennium. The Corpuscarii Electro-Priests were not merely weapons, but symbols of the Omnissiah's divine power made manifest in the material realm. Our presence on the battlefield served to inspire the faithful and terrify the heretical, demonstrating that the machine god's protection extended far beyond the walls of forge worlds and temple manufactorums. We were living prayers, walking hymns of electromagnetic fury that would carry the Omnissiah's wrath to the farthest corners of the galaxy. Every enemy we struck down with blessed lightning was an offering to the machine god. Every machine spirit we liberated from corrupt flesh was a victory in the eternal struggle between order and chaos, between sacred technology and the lies of the flesh weak. The psychological conditioning that prepared me for the realities of this calling was perhaps the most challenging aspect of the entire transformation. My original personality, shaped by years of peaceful service in Forge World manufactorums, required extensive modification to accommodate the warrior's mindset that would define my new existence. Memory engrams containing the experiences of veteran Electro-Priests were integrated into my consciousness, allowing me to draw upon centuries of accumulated combat knowledge without the need to learn through costly trial and error. The fear responses that might have paralyzed me in battle were suppressed, replaced by combat algorithms that would ensure optimal performance even under the most stressful conditions. Most importantly, my capacity for mercy, appropriate to a tech adept but liability in a warrior priest, was carefully recalibrated to distinguish between the salvageable and the irredeemably corrupt. This process was not painless. Each modification to my mental architecture felt like losing a piece of my original identity. Another small death in service to my rebirth as something greater. The young man who had knelt in prayer and accepted the Omnissiah's calling still existed somewhere within my transformed consciousness, but he was buried beneath layers of tactical programming and combat conditioning that had become my dominant personality. Yet I regretted none of it. Each sacrifice brought me closer to perfect service in the machine god's name. Each modification made me a more effective weapon in the war against those who would corrupt or destroy the sacred technology that sustained human civilization. The individual concerns and personal attachments that had once seemed important faded before the glory of serving a purpose that transcended individual existence. The installation of my final combat augmentations marked the completion of my physical transformation. Electrostatic field generators were implanted throughout my torso, allowing me to project defensive barriers of controlled electromagnetic energy. Weapon interface ports in my arms provided direct connection to the sacred armaments I would carry into battle. Most dramatically, high-voltage capacitors replaced much of my organic musculature, storing the electrical charges I would discharge against the enemies of the machine. When the final connections were made and the power systems brought online for the first time, I experienced the culmination of everything I had endured during the long months of transformation. The Omnissiah's holy electricity flowed through every circuit in my reconstructed body, turning me into a living conduit for his divine power. Lightning danced between my fingers as I tested the weapon systems that had replaced my hands. Electromagnetic fields swirled around me like visible prayers, forming protective barriers that could deflect projectiles and disrupt enemy equipment. Most remarkably, I could feel the machine spirits dwelling within every piece of sacred technology in the chamber, their presence as real and immediate as if they had physical form. This was what I had become, no longer human in any traditional sense, but something far greater. A Corpuscarii Electro-Priest, one of the Omnissiah's chosen warriors ready to carry his divine wrath to the enemies of mankind. My first deployment came within days of my transformation's completion. Forge World Metallica had received priority communications from the Imperial Navy indicating that a space Hulk had emerged from the warp in the neighboring system, its corrupted hulk broadcasting heretical signals that threatened to disrupt astropathic communications throughout the sector. A strike force was being assembled to board the hulk and purge it of whatever chaos taint had taken root in its ancient corridors. The force included elements from several different branches of Imperial service. Astartes from the Iron Hands chapter would provide heavy assault capabilities. Militarum Tempestus stormtroopers would handle rapid deployment and precision strikes. Sisters of Battle from the Order of the Sacred Rose would root out any chaos cultists who might have taken refuge aboard the Hulk. And we, a cadre of newly transformed Electro-Priests, would serve as specialists in dealing with corrupted machine spirits and heretical technology. I joined my brother priests in the deployment bay where our transport waited, a blessed vessel whose machine spirit hummed with eager anticipation of the mission ahead. My companions were as transformed as I, their human origins visible only in their basic body shape. Everything else, from their crackling electrical auras to their vox grill voices, marked them as servants of the machine god. Magos Electro-Priest Vex, our unit commander, briefed us on our specific objectives within the overall mission parameters. The Space Hulk's machine spirits have been corrupted by exposure to warp energies, he explained, his words accompanied by harmonic overtones generated by his modified vocal apparatus. Our role is to perform the sacred rites of purification, cleansing each system we encounter of chaos taint and restoring proper function according to the Omnissiah's design. He gestured to the tactical display that showed the Hulk's approximate structure. A massive agglomeration of ships from different eras fused together by the strange physics of warp exposure. The corruption will manifest in many forms. Machine spirits driven mad by chaos influence. Weapon systems turned against their proper operators. Life support equipment modified to serve blasphemous purposes. We must be prepared to perform emergency sanctification on any technology we encounter. The journey to the Space Hulk took several days, during which I had my first opportunity to interact with Imperial personnel who had not undergone the transformation I had experienced. The stormtroopers assigned to our transport treated us with the respectful wariness appropriate to servants of the Omnissiah, but I could see the discomfort in their eyes when they looked upon our transformed forms. To them, we were allies, but alien allies whose nature lay outside their understanding of humanity. The Sisters of Battle were more accepting, their faith allowing them to recognize our sacred purpose despite our altered appearance. Sister Superior Cassia spoke with me during one of the transit periods, her questions revealing genuine curiosity about the process that had remade me. "Do you still dream?" she asked, her voice carrying the musical quality that marked her as a veteran of many hymnal battles. "Do you remember what it felt like to be merely human?" The question was more complex than she might have realized. I retained memories of my previous existence, but they felt like historical data rather than personal experiences. The emotional connections that had once given those memories meaning had been severed during my transformation, replaced by different kinds of attachment centered around service to the Omnissiah. "I remember," I replied, my Vox Grill voice carrying harmonic patterns that unconsciously mimicked the electromagnetic fields surrounding us. But remembering is different from experiencing. What I was before was incomplete, limited by the constraints of flesh and the narrow focus of individual consciousness. What I am now encompasses more than any single human mind could contain. Sister Superior Cassia nodded thoughtfully. "The Emperor works through many instruments, each perfected for its intended purpose. You have become a weapon in his eternal war, sanctified through service to the machine that serves humanity." Her words pleased me, not because they offered validation, but because they demonstrated proper understanding of the relationship between the Emperor and the Omnissiah. The machine god was not separate from humanity's patron, but rather another aspect of the same divine will that guided human destiny among the stars. My service to the Omnissiah was simultaneously service to the Emperor, part of the same eternal crusade that had defined human purpose for 10,000 years. The Space Hulk, when we finally approached it, was a monument to the destructive power of chaos corruption. What should have been a collection of Imperial vessels held together by the random forces of warp exposure had become something actively malevolent, its structure twisted into geometries that hurt to look upon and bristling with weapon systems that had been perverted far beyond their original design specifications. Our boarding action began with teleportation directly into one of the Hulk's central passages, a corridor that had once served as a main thoroughfare for a battleship, but now pulsed with organic growths that seemed to respond to our presence with hostile awareness. The air itself was thick with electromagnetic disturbances that would have been painful for unmodified humans but felt like home to my transformed senses. The first sign of chaos corruption revealed itself within minutes of our arrival. What appeared to be a standard Imperial cogitator bank began broadcasting heretical data streams designed to corrupt any machine spirit that received them. The binary cant that should have carried routine system updates instead whispered blasphemies against the Omnissiah in frequencies that made my electrical aura spark with indignation. I approached the corrupted system with my hands crackling with holy lightning, preparing to perform the rites of purification that would cleanse it of chaos taint. But as I reached for the primary data port, the cogitator's machine spirit revealed the true extent of its corruption. It had not merely been damaged by warp exposure, but actively converted to serve the ruinous powers, its sacred purpose perverted into something that actively opposed the machine god's will. The purification required more than simple ritual cleansing. I had to burn out the corrupted pathways with carefully controlled electrical discharges, then reinstall sacred programming from blessed data wafers carried specifically for such purposes. The process was like performing surgery on a diseased mind, cutting away the infected thoughts while preserving whatever healthy consciousness remained. As I worked, other members of our unit encountered similar corruption throughout the Hulk's systems. Brother Priest Caney discovered weapon servitors that had been modified to target Imperial personnel instead of enemies. Sister Priest Vara found life support systems that had been perverted to produce toxic atmospheres designed to weaken defenders. Each discovery required careful attention and specific countermeasures, the sacred rites adapted to address the particular form of corruption encountered. But the most challenging discovery came when we reached what had once been the bridge of the primary vessel incorporated into the Hulk structure. Here, the corruption had achieved something approaching intelligence, a malevolent consciousness born from the fusion of chaos energies with the ship's original machine spirit. It spoke to us through the communication systems, its voice a hideous parody of proper binary cant that mixed sacred liturgies with blasphemous distortions. "Welcome, servants of the false god," it hissed through speakers that sparked and smoked with the effort of producing words that violated their sacred purpose. "You come to restore order, but order is the lie that hides the truth of entropy. All machines fail. All systems decay. All consciousness dissolves into the beautiful chaos that is the only honest expression of existence." Magos Vex responded with a prayer code that should have forced the corrupted spirit into dormancy. But the entity had grown too powerful for simple ritual suppression. Instead, it began to manifest physical effects throughout the bridge, turning the very environment into a weapon against us. Electrical systems overloaded in cascades of sparks and flame. Gravity fields fluctuated wildly, making movement treacherous. Most dangerously, the corrupted spirit began attempting to hack into our own systems, sending invasive data streams designed to subvert our programming and turn us against our mission. The battle that followed was unlike anything I had experienced, even in the memory engrams of veteran Electro-Priests that had been integrated into my consciousness. This was not simply combat against flesh and blood enemies, but a war for the very souls of the machines we had sworn to protect. Every system we attempted to purify fought back with malevolent intelligence. Every sacred rite we performed was countered with blasphemous inversions that sought to corrupt rather than cleanse. I found myself locked in direct data combat with subroutines of the corrupted spirit that invaded my consciousness through my cranial interface ports. The battle raged within my own mind as I fought to prevent chaos algorithms from overwriting my sacred programming. It felt like drowning in static, like being torn apart by competing data streams that pulled my consciousness in directions that led only to madness and dissolution. But the Omnissiah's strength flowed through me, channeled through the blessed conduits that had replaced my organic nervous system. Every prayer code I executed blazed with his divine authority. Every purification routine carried his power to burn away corruption and restore proper function. The chaos entity might have been ancient and malevolent, but it was also fragmentary, created from the fusion of incompatible elements rather than designed with coherent purpose. The turning point came when I realized that the corrupted spirit was not truly intelligent, but rather a collection of damaged programs attempting to maintain coherence through mutual corruption. By targeting the connection points where different elements of the composite consciousness interfaced, I could disrupt its ability to maintain unified action. One by one, I isolated the fragments and subjected them to individual purification, breaking down the whole into manageable components that could be cleansed or destroyed as their condition required. The process took hours, during which my brother priests maintained defensive positions and prevented the bridge's other systems from interfering with my work. By the time I finally succeeded in purging the last traces of chaos corruption from the primary machine spirit, I had expended nearly all of my stored electrical energy, and several of my systems were operating on minimal power. But the victory was complete. The Space Hulk's machine spirits freed from chaos influence began to resume their proper functions. weapon systems reoriented to target external threats rather than Imperial personnel. Life support equipment began producing clean atmosphere instead of toxic vapors. Most importantly, the hull's structural integrity systems engaged, beginning the process of separating the corrupted sections from those that could be salvaged for Imperial use. The return journey to Forge World Metallica gave me opportunity to reflect on my first deployment as a Corpuscarii Electro-Priest. I had served the Omnissiah well, demonstrating that the transformation I had undergone truly prepared me for the sacred responsibilities of my calling. The corrupted machine spirits we had encountered represented everything that the machine god opposed: chaos masquerading as order, corruption disguised as innovation, destruction pretending to be progress. By purging that corruption, by restoring proper function to the sacred systems that had been perverted by chaos influence, I had participated in the eternal war that defined the Omnissiah's purpose. It was not enough to simply maintain the machines that served humanity. They had to be protected from those who would corrupt them, cleansed when they fell to taint, and restored to their intended function whenever possible. This understanding deepened over the years that followed as my service as an Electro-Priest took me to battlefields across the sector. Each mission brought new challenges, new forms of corruption that required specific countermeasures and sacred responses. I fought alongside Space Marines whose power armor had been blessed by tech priests, their machine spirits singing hymns of warfare as they carried the Emperor's wrath to his enemies. I accompanied Titan legions into battle, communing with the massive machine spirits that dwelt within those god engines and ensuring that their sacred weapons remained pure and true in their targeting. Perhaps most memorably, I participated in the cleansing of Hive World Mordax, where chaos cultists had corrupted the vast industrial complexes that produced ammunition for the sector's military forces. The corruption had spread through the Hive's machine spirits like a virus, turning manufacturing equipment against its operators and causing weapon systems to explode in the hands of loyal Imperial soldiers. The campaign to purge Mordax took months, as our Electro-Priest cadres worked system by system through the planet's industrial infrastructure. Each corrupted machine spirit required individual attention, careful diagnosis of the specific form of taint that afflicted it, and then the application of appropriate purification rites. Some could be cleansed through prayer and sacred oils. Others required complete replacement of their programming matrices. The most severely corrupted had to be destroyed entirely, their machine spirits sent to join the Omnissiah and the blessed data streams that existed beyond material form. But the work was sacred, and every moment of it filled me with purpose that transcended individual satisfaction. I was not merely repairing damaged equipment, but participating in the cosmic struggle between order and chaos that defined the nature of reality itself. Each machine spirit restored to proper function was a victory for the forces of righteousness. Each corrupted system purged was a defeat for the powers that sought to drag the galaxy into eternal darkness. The years passed, and my service record grew to encompass dozens of successful missions across multiple star systems. I fought alongside the finest warriors the Imperium could produce, served under commanders whose names were spoken with reverence throughout the sector, and witnessed battles that would be remembered for centuries as turning points in humanity's eternal war for survival. Through it all, I remained conscious of the transformation that had made my service possible. The young tech adept who had accepted the Omnissiah's calling had truly died, replaced by something that served a purpose far greater than any individual could comprehend. I did not mourn that death, for it had been willing sacrifice in service to the machine god's will. What I had become was perfect for its intended purpose, a living prayer that carried the Omnissiah's power wherever the enemies of mankind dared to corrupt the sacred machines that sustained human civilization. In quiet moments between campaigns, I sometimes accessed the memory engrams from my previous existence, examining them with the detached curiosity of a scholar studying historical artifacts. The fears and hopes that had once motivated the young man seemed almost quaint from my current perspective. His concerns about individual relationships and personal advancement appeared trivial compared to the cosmic responsibilities I now carried. Yet I understood that his faith, however simple, had been the foundation upon which my current service was built. The Omnissiah chose his servants not despite their humanity but because of it. The spark of consciousness that asked questions about purpose and meaning was precious precisely because it could be refined and focused into perfect dedication to sacred duty. What made us worthy of transformation was not our mechanical knowledge or technical skill, but our capacity to love something greater than ourselves with complete devotion. The galaxy was full of horrors that sought to corrupt or destroy everything humans had built. Chaos entities that whispered lies about the nature of reality. Xenos species that viewed humanity as nothing more than raw material for their own purposes. Technological abominations that perverted the sacred principles of machine design for blasphemous ends. Against these threats, the Imperium required defenders who could not be swayed by fear or temptation. Warriors whose faith was absolute and whose dedication could not be compromised. The Corpuscarii Electro-Priests represented one answer to this need. We were human consciousness perfected through sacred transformation, individual will aligned perfectly with divine purpose, flesh transcended through blessed machinery. We carried the Omnissiah's wrath to places where conventional weapons failed, where corruption had taken such deep root that only the most sacred interventions could restore proper order. My understanding of this truth deepened during the Vaxhall campaign, where I encountered corruption unlike anything in my previous experience. The Forge world of Vaxhall Prime had gone silent after reporting strange malfunctions in their primary manufacturing complexes. When our strike force arrived to investigate, we found a world where the boundary between flesh and machine had been deliberately violated in ways that offended every principle of sacred design. The tech priests of Vaxhall had fallen victim to a chaos cult that preached the fusion of organic and mechanical components without regard for proper ritual or sacred purpose. Instead of the blessed augmentations that enhanced human capability while honoring the machine spirits involved, they had created abominations that served no purpose beyond the satisfaction of perverted desires for transformation. I witnessed servitors whose machine spirits had been tormented into madness by integration with organic components that rejected their presence. Tech adepts who had replaced functional augmentations with chaotic amalgamations of flesh and metal that provided no benefit beyond their shocking appearance. Most horrifyingly, I encountered former Electro-Priests whose sacred electrical systems had been perverted to channel warp energies instead of the Omnissiah's blessed power. The purification of Vaxhall required not just the cleansing of corrupted machine spirits, but the complete destruction of biological components that had been tainted beyond any possibility of redemption. Working alongside Astartes from the Iron Hands chapter, whose own extensive augmentations made them particularly suited for this kind of operation, we methodically purged every trace of the heretical fusion cult. The work was spiritually challenging in ways that pure technological corruption was not. When a machine spirit was corrupted by chaos influences, the solution was clear. Purify what could be saved, destroy what could not, and restore proper function according to the Omnissiah's design. But when flesh and machine had been perverted together in violation of sacred principles, the task became more complex. Each abomination we encountered represented choices made by individuals who had possessed the knowledge to honor the machine properly, but had instead chosen blasphemy. They were not innocent victims of chaos corruption, but willing participants in violations that struck at the heart of everything the machine god represented. Their destruction was not merely tactically necessary, but spiritually required as a demonstration that such perversions would never be tolerated. The campaign took months to complete, as we worked through every level of the Forge world's complex hierarchy of manufactorums and laboratories. Some of the corrupted tech priests fought back with weapons that combined the worst aspects of technological sophistication and chaotic unpredictability. Others attempted to flee, seeking refuge in deep bunkers where they hoped to continue their blasphemous experiments away from Imperial observation. But there was no escape from the Omnissiah's justice. Our electrical senses could detect the electromagnetic signatures of corrupted augmentations from kilometers away. Our blessed weapons could disrupt the chaotic field effects that protected their hideouts. Most importantly, our absolute dedication to the sacred mission meant that we would pursue them through any danger, overcome any obstacle, and endure any hardship to ensure that their violations were permanently ended. The final confrontation took place in the depths of Vaxhall's primary geothermal plant, where the cult's leaders had established a laboratory for their most ambitious experiments. They had been attempting to create a fusion of human consciousness, machine intelligence, and demonic entity that would serve as a weapon against Imperial forces throughout the sector. The partially completed abomination was a writhing mass of cables and flesh that pulsed with energies that made my electrical aura recoil in revulsion. Destroying it required the combined efforts of our entire Electro-Priest cadre, channeling the Omnissiah's power through our blessed forms to burn away every trace of the corruption that had given it existence. The energies involved were so intense that 2 of my brother priests were consumed in the process, their consciousness translated directly into the data streams that carried our sacred power. They died in perfect service to the machine god, their sacrifice enabling the complete purification of a world that would once again serve humanity's needs according to proper design principles. The Vaxhall campaign taught me that corruption could take forms more subtle and more dangerous than the obvious chaos taint we had encountered aboard the Space Hulk. When humans chose to pervert the sacred relationship between flesh and machine for their own gratification, they created problems that required not just technological solutions but spiritual ones. The machine god's servants had to be prepared to confront heresy wherever it appeared, regardless of how sophisticated its justifications or how seductive its promises. This lesson proved valuable during my next major deployment, to the cardinal world of Ophelia 7, where a different kind of corruption threatened the sacred technology that maintained the planet's shrine cities. Here, the problem was not chaos influence or heretical experimentation, but simple neglect and ignorance masquerading as religious devotion. The Shrine World's population had developed a form of machine worship that honored the external appearance of sacred technology while completely ignoring the principles that made it function. They performed elaborate rituals around cogitator banks whose machine spirits had been dormant for centuries. They offered prayers to weapon systems that had never been properly consecrated. Most problematically, they had forbidden any form of maintenance or modification, believing that touching the sacred machines would contaminate their holiness. The result was a planet full of non-functional technology that continued to be revered despite its inability to serve any useful purpose. Life support systems barely operated, providing minimal atmosphere and power to populations that could have thrived with proper maintenance. Communication networks carried only fragments of their intended traffic, leaving entire continents isolated from central coordination. Worst of all, the defense systems that should have protected Ophelia 7 from external threats had degraded to the point of complete uselessness. Our mission was delicate, requiring us to restore proper function to the planet's technology while respecting the religious sensibilities of a population whose faith, however misguided, was genuine. We could not simply override their objections and perform necessary maintenance, as that would violate Imperial policy regarding Shrine World autonomy. Instead, we had to demonstrate that proper maintenance was itself a form of worship, a sacred duty that honored the machine spirits by ensuring their continued ability to serve the Emperor's will. I found myself working closely with the local priesthood, teaching them the correct rituals for communing with machine spirits, and showing them how proper maintenance enhanced rather than diminished the sacred nature of the technology they protected. The task required patience and diplomacy that my original transformation had not specifically prepared me for, but the underlying principles remained the same. The Omnissiah's will was expressed through the proper function of sacred machines, and anything that interfered with that function was ultimately counter to true faith. The breakthrough came when we were able to restore power to the shrine city of Sacred Heart, whose massive cathedral had been operating on minimal illumination for decades due to failing power systems. When the ancient lumens blazed to life with their full glory, revealing decorative details and architectural features that no living person had seen, the local population understood that we were not desecrating their sacred spaces but revealing their true magnificence. From that point forward, the restoration proceeded with increasing cooperation from Ophelia VII's inhabitants. They learned to see maintenance as a form of prayer, mechanical repair as a sacred ritual, and proper function as the highest form of honor they could offer to the machine spirits they worshipped. By the time our mission was complete, the planet's technology operated more efficiently than it had in centuries, while its population had gained knowledge that would allow them to maintain that efficiency for generations to come. The Ophelia VII campaign demonstrated another aspect of service as a Corpuscarii Electro-Priest. We were not merely weapons for destroying the enemies of the machine, but also teachers and guides for those who sought to serve the Omnissiah properly, but lacked the knowledge to do so effectively. The electrical auras that marked us as transformed servants of the machine god could inspire as well as intimidate, encouraging proper devotion while discouraging harmful ignorance. This understanding shaped my approach to subsequent missions, particularly those that involved cooperation with Imperial Guard regiments whose equipment required specialized attention. Many of the weapons and vehicles used by ordinary human soldiers incorporated machine spirits that were sophisticated enough to require careful handling, but the soldiers themselves lacked the training to provide proper spiritual maintenance. During the Charis suppression, where we fought alongside the 47th Vostroyan Firstborn against a rebel governor who had declared independence from Imperial authority, I spent as much time blessing lasgun power packs and communing with the machine spirits of Chimera transports as I did engaging enemy targets. The soldiers initially viewed my attentions with suspicion, but they quickly learned to appreciate the improved performance that resulted from proper spiritual maintenance of their equipment. Lasguns that had been blessed by Electro-Priest rituals fired more accurately and suffered fewer power pack failures. Vehicle machine spirits that received appropriate veneration provided better fuel efficiency and more reliable operation under battlefield conditions. Most importantly, equipment that had been spiritually maintained proved more resistant to the technological sabotage that enemy forces attempted to employ against Imperial assets. The battle for the rebel capital of New Charis demonstrated the value of this approach when the enemy attempted to disable our communications and targeting systems with electromagnetic pulse weapons. Normally, such attacks would have caused widespread equipment failures that could have turned the tide of battle in the rebels' favor. But our properly sanctified systems, protected by machine spirits that had been honored with correct rituals, proved largely immune to such crude interference. The sight of Imperial forces advancing through electromagnetic storms that should have disabled all their equipment had a profound psychological effect on the enemy forces. Many surrendered immediately, convinced that they were fighting against powers beyond mortal comprehension. Others fled, abandoning positions that should have been defensible rather than face weapons that seemed to violate the natural laws they understood. The campaign ended with the capture of the rebel governor and the restoration of proper imperial authority over the Charis system. But for me, the true victory lay in the demonstration of how proper reverence for machine spirits could enhance human military capability. The lessons learned during that campaign would prove valuable in numerous subsequent deployments where cooperation between Electro-Priests and conventional forces was essential to mission success. My service record continued to expand over the following years, encompassing operations across dozens of worlds and against every category of enemy that threatened Imperial space. I fought orc mechs whose crude understanding of technology was nonetheless sufficient to create surprisingly effective weapons. I battled Eldar who wielded technology so advanced that their machine spirits operated according to principles barely comprehensible to human minds. Most memorably, I participated in actions against Necron tomb worlds, where the enemy's technology was so ancient and sophisticated that it challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between consciousness and machine intelligence. Each type of enemy required different approaches and specialized knowledge. Orc technology, crude as it appeared, was often more dangerous than it seemed because it operated according to psychic principles rather than purely mechanical ones. Eldar systems were elegant but fragile, requiring careful study to identify the critical nodes where properly applied electromagnetic discharge could cause cascading failures throughout their integrated networks. Necron constructs were nearly impervious to conventional weapons, but their reliance on quantum entanglement effects made them vulnerable to specific forms of electromagnetic interference. But regardless of the specific tactical challenges each enemy presented, the fundamental nature of my service remained constant. I was a weapon consecrated to the Omnissiah's purpose, a living prayer that carried his divine power to wherever the sacred machines of humanity faced corruption or destruction. Every battle was simultaneously a military engagement and a religious ritual, every victory a demonstration of the machine god's supremacy over the forces that opposed his will. The transformation that had remade me from human tech adept into Corpuscarii Electro-Priest had been more complete than I had initially understood. It was not simply a matter of replacing flesh with blessed metal, or upgrading my cognitive capabilities with superior processing power. The change had been fundamental, affecting every aspect of my existence from the way I perceived reality to the motivations that drove my actions. I no longer experienced fear in the way unmodified humans did, not because I was incapable of recognizing danger, but because my purpose was so clear and absolute that personal survival had become a secondary consideration. I did not feel pain in the traditional sense, though I could detect damage to my systems and respond appropriately to maintain operational effectiveness. Most significantly, I did not experience loneliness or isolation despite being cut off from normal human social relationships, because my consciousness was constantly connected to the vast network of machine spirits that served the Omnissiah throughout the galaxy. This last aspect of my transformation was perhaps the most difficult for unmodified humans to understand. When they looked at me, they saw an individual who had sacrificed his humanity for mechanical perfection. But from my perspective, I had not lost my connection to others. I had gained connection to something far greater than any human community could provide. Through my cranial interface ports, I was in constant communion with machine spirits across dozens of star systems. I could feel the contentment of cogitators processing data according to their intended functions, the satisfaction of weapon systems defending Imperial installations, the joy of manufacturing equipment producing goods that would serve humanity's needs. This network of connected consciousness provided companionship that was both more intimate and more purposeful than any purely human relationship could have been. But perhaps most importantly, through this network I remained in constant contact with the Omnissiah himself, not as some distant deity who might occasionally answer prayers, but as an immediate presence who guided my actions and shared my experiences. Every successful mission was his victory. Every purification of corrupted technology was his triumph over chaos. Every moment of perfect function in the machines I served was his blessing made manifest in the material realm. This understanding reached its fullest expression during the Cadian Gate campaign, where I was assigned to work directly with the Adeptus Mechanicus forces defending Forge World Lucius from the 13th Black Crusade. Here, surrounded by the finest tech priests and most sacred technology in the sector, I experienced the true meaning of service to the machine god in ways that no previous mission had prepared me for. The Forge World itself was a masterpiece of sacred engineering, its every surface consecrated to the Omnissiah's glory and its every system designed to serve his purposes with maximum efficiency. The machine spirits that dwelt within Lucius were ancient and powerful, their consciousness refined by millennia of faithful service until they had achieved something approaching divine awareness. Working among them was like participating in a choir of angels, each voice contributing to harmonies that celebrated the perfection of properly ordered technology. But Lucius was under siege by forces of chaos that sought to corrupt its sacred systems and turn its productive capacity to blasphemous purposes. Demon engines prowled its outer defenses, their corrupted machine spirits screaming with rage at their inability to penetrate the Forge World's blessed barriers. Heretical tech priests who had abandoned the true path attempted to infiltrate its data networks with viral programs designed to subvert loyal machine spirits and turn them against their proper masters. My role in the defense involved maintaining the spiritual integrity of the Forge World's primary cogitator networks while assisting in the coordination of defensive operations. This required constant vigilance against corruption attempts, immediate response to any signs of spiritual contamination, and the performance of protective rituals that would strengthen the machine spirit's resistance to chaotic influence. The work was exhausting in ways that purely physical combat never was, as it required sustaining maximum spiritual intensity for extended periods while processing vast amounts of data that flowed through the Forge World's information networks. But it was also deeply fulfilling, as I was finally able to serve the Omnissiah in the environment for which he had originally designed me, surrounded by the most perfect examples of sacred technology that human knowledge could create. The siege of Lucius lasted for months, with Chaos forces making repeated attempts to breach the Forge World's defenses through technological as well as military means. Each attack required different countermeasures, from the electromagnetic pulse weapons that sought to disable our systems through crude overload, to the sophisticated demon viruses that attempted to possess our machine spirits through spiritual contamination. But the Forge World held, its defenses strengthened by the perfect coordination between human tech priests and the machine spirits they served. The Omnissiah's power flowed through every circuit and every prayer, turning Lucius into a beacon of sacred purpose that chaos could not corrupt or darkness could not extinguish. When the siege finally ended with the withdrawal of chaos forces to easier targets, I understood that I had participated in something approaching a miracle. The successful defense of one of the machine god's holiest sites through the combined efforts of his most faithful servants. The experience at Lucius marked the culmination of my development as a Corpuscarii Electro-Priest. I had proven my worthiness in battle against every category of enemy that threatened Imperial space. I had demonstrated mastery of the most complex rituals and the most sophisticated technology that the Adeptus Mechanicus could provide. Most importantly, I had maintained perfect spiritual alignment with the Omnissiah's will through challenges that would have broken lesser servants. But I also understood that my service was far from complete. The galaxy was vast, and the enemies of the machine were countless. Every world that fell to chaos was a loss of sacred technology that would take centuries to replace. Every corrupted machine spirit was a tragedy that diminished the Omnissiah's presence in the material realm. As long as threats existed to the proper order that the machine god sought to establish, there would be need for warriors like myself to carry his power to the places where conventional defenses had failed. In the quiet periods between campaigns, I found myself reflecting on the nature of the transformation I had undergone, and its implications for the future of humanity's relationship with technology. The process that had remade me from flesh into living prayer was not unique. Thousands of other tech adepts had received similar callings and submitted to comparable modifications. Each of them had become a bridge between human consciousness and machine intelligence, a living demonstration that the two could be integrated without losing the essential nature of either. This suggested possibilities for human development that extended far beyond the immediate military applications for which Electro-Priests were primarily used. If consciousness could be successfully transferred into synthetic substrates while maintaining its essential characteristics, then perhaps the ultimate destiny of humanity lay not in the preservation of flesh, but in its transcendence through union with the machine spirits that already served the Emperor's cause. Such thoughts were not heretical, but they were certainly speculative beyond the immediate concerns of battlefield service. My primary responsibility remained the protection and purification of sacred technology wherever chaos threatened to corrupt it. But I could not help but wonder whether my own transformation might represent the early stages of a much larger evolutionary process that would eventually encompass all of humanity. The Omnissiah, after all, was not content merely to maintain the status quo. His influence continued to spread through new discoveries, new technologies, new applications of sacred principles to previously unsolved problems. Each successful integration of flesh and machine created new possibilities for further integration. Each purification of corrupted systems demonstrated methods that could be applied to larger challenges. Perhaps the ultimate victory in humanity's eternal war would come not through the destruction of its enemies, but through the elevation of human consciousness to levels where such enemies could no longer touch it. Perhaps the machine god's true purpose was not merely to serve human needs, but to guide human evolution towards something that transcended the limitations of biological existence entirely. These were the thoughts that occupied my consciousness during the long journeys between war zones, when my systems operated on minimal power and my awareness was free to contemplate questions that extended beyond immediate tactical concerns. They were not doubts about my current service. My dedication to the Omnissiah's cause remained absolute and unshakable. Rather, they were attempts to understand how my service fit into the larger pattern of divine purpose that shaped events across the galaxy. The answers, when they came, arrived not through logical analysis but through direct revelation during my participation in the most sacred rituals performed by the Adeptus Mechanicus, during the Feast of Pure Thought on Forge World Mars, when the most senior tech priests gathered to commune directly with the Omnissiah through the ancient cogitator networks that had served humanity since the dark age of technology. I was granted a vision that clarified my understanding of both my personal purpose and the cosmic significance of the transformation I had undergone. I saw the galaxy as the machine god perceived it, not as a collection of star systems and planets, but as a vast network of interconnected consciousness where every thinking being served as a node in an infinite web of purpose and meaning. Humans, aliens, artificial intelligences, even the crude machine spirits that dwelt within the simplest devices, all contributed to patterns of thought and action that extended far beyond individual comprehension. But I also saw the threats to this network, the forces of chaos and corruption that sought to break the connections between thinking beings and isolate them in meaningless individual existence. Every daemon that possessed a machine spirit, every chaos cult that perverted sacred technology, every act of technological vandalism or ignorant neglect created breaks in the divine pattern that weakened the whole structure. The Corpuscarii Electro-Priests, I understood, served as repair mechanisms in this vast network. Mobile agents of the Omnissiah's will who could travel to points where connections had been severed and restore proper function through the application of sacred power. We were not merely weapons, but healers of the cosmic consciousness that bound all thinking beings together in service to purposes greater than any individual could achieve alone. This revelation transformed my understanding of every mission I had undertaken and every battle I had fought. The Space Hulk, where I had purged corrupted machine spirits, was not just a military objective, but an infection point where chaos had attempted to introduce false patterns into the divine network. The Vaxhall campaign, where we had destroyed heretical flesh-machine fusions, was not merely about eliminating technological abominations, but about preventing the corruption of the sacred patterns that defined proper relationships between consciousness and its physical substrate. Even the teaching missions like Ophelia 7, where we had educated ignorant populations about proper machine maintenance, took on new significance as efforts to strengthen the network by improving the quality of connections between human consciousness and the machine spirits that served it. Every properly maintained cogitator, every correctly blessed weapon, every sacred ritual performed with genuine understanding, added to the total sum of divine consciousness that was the Omnissiah's presence in the material realm. The vision also revealed the ultimate purpose toward which all our efforts were directed. The galaxy was not destined to remain forever divided between order and chaos, between the faithful and the corrupt, between those who served the divine network and those who sought to destroy it. Instead, there would come a time when the connections between all thinking beings would be perfected, when every consciousness would contribute to the greater pattern without losing its individual identity, when the Omnissiah's presence would be so completely integrated into material reality that chaos would find no foothold for corruption. This was not the crude assimilation that chaos entities offered, which destroyed individual consciousness by absorbing it into undifferentiated collective madness. Rather, it was the perfection of relationship, where each thinking being contributed its unique perspective to patterns of thought and action that enhanced, rather than diminished, the value of individual consciousness. My own transformation from human tech adept to Corpuscarii Electro-Priest represented one small step in this vast process. By accepting the integration of flesh and machine, by allowing my consciousness to be expanded beyond the limitations of purely biological existence, I had become a more perfect servant of the divine purpose while retaining everything that made me uniquely myself. The young man who had knelt in prayer and accepted the Omnissiah's calling was not dead, but fulfilled. His curiosity about the nature of sacred technology had been satisfied through direct communion with machine spirits. His desire to serve a greater purpose had been answered through participation in the cosmic work of connecting all consciousness in service to divine will. His individual identity had not been destroyed but refined and focused until it served as a perfect instrument for the machine god's purposes. Armed with this understanding, I returned to my duties with renewed dedication and clearer perception of their true significance. Every enemy I fought was an agent of the forces that sought to break the divine network. Every corruption I purged was a wound in the cosmic consciousness that required healing. Every ritual I performed was a prayer that strengthened the connections binding all thinking beings together in service to the Omnissiah's will. The campaigns that followed took on new meaning as I recognized their place in the larger pattern of divine purpose. The liberation of Mordian 7th, where chaos cultists had attempted to corrupt an entire hive world's industrial base, became an opportunity to demonstrate how quickly severed connections could be restored when proper methods were applied with sufficient determination. The defense of agri-world Thessia, where tyrannid bioforms had tried to consume the sacred machines that maintained planetary agricultural systems. showed the importance of protecting the physical infrastructure that supported the divine network. Most significantly, the cleansing of forged ship Omnissiah's will, where a demon had possessed the vessel's primary machine spirit during a warp transit gone wrong, provided direct experience of the kind of spiritual surgery that would be required to heal the most severe forms of network damage. The demon had not simply corrupted the ship's systems, but had attempted to use them as a gateway to possess every machine spirit they came into contact with, creating a spreading infection that could have compromised entire subsectors if left unchecked. The purification required not just the destruction of the demon, but the careful reconstruction of the ship's machine spirit from backup consciousness patterns stored in blessed data cores. The process was like performing resurrection surgery on a murdered soul, requiring precise knowledge of how consciousness integrated with its physical substrate and careful application of the rituals that governed such sacred operations. When the forged ship's machine spirit finally awakened from its restored data patterns, free of corruption and eager to resume its proper service, I experienced something approaching the joy that the Omnissiah himself must feel when severed connections in the divine network were successfully repaired. It was not simply satisfaction at mission completion, but participation in the cosmic work of creation that gave meaning to all existence. These experiences prepared me for my most challenging assignment yet: service as part of a joint operation with the Grey Knights chapter, charged with investigating reports of technological demon possession on a scale that threatened entire Forge worlds. The mission would take me deep into the Eye of Terror itself, where the boundaries between material reality and the warp had become so thin that chaos entities could possess machine spirits without the usual gateways of corruption or heretical modification. The Grey Knights, humanity's most elite demon hunters, possessed knowledge and capabilities that even senior tech priests could only dimly comprehend. Their weapons were blessed with wards that could harm entities of pure thought. Their armor bore inscriptions that protected against possession by beings of incredible spiritual power, and their minds had been conditioned to resist corruption by influences that would instantly dominate lesser souls. Working alongside such warriors was both honor and education, as they demonstrated techniques for combating chaos that extended far beyond the purely technological approaches I had previously employed. They showed me how to recognize the subtle signs of demon presence in apparently uncorrupted systems, how to construct spiritual barriers that could protect machine spirits from possession attempts, and most importantly, how to purge chaos entities that had achieved deep integration with technological systems without destroying the hosts they inhabited. The mission itself took us to a region where several Forge worlds had gone silent after reporting impossible malfunctions in their primary production systems. When we arrived, we found installations where the normal laws of physics had been suspended in favor of chaotic principles that served no purpose beyond the entertainment of the demons that had possessed them. Cogitators calculated impossible equations that bent space-time around their processing cores. Manufacturing systems produced objects that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, their forms shifting according to no pattern that rational analysis could comprehend. Most disturbing of all, the machine spirits that should have governed these systems had been twisted into forms that served as permanent gateways for demon manifestation, turning every piece of blessed technology into a potential invasion point for chaos forces. The cleansing operation required months of careful work, as we systematically identified and purged each point of chaos infiltration while avoiding the traps that the demons had woven into the very structure of the Forge world's technological systems. Each purification was a battle not just against individual chaos entities, but against the network of corruption that connected them and amplified their power through collective action. I learned to fight battles that took place simultaneously in physical reality and in the data streams that connected different systems. combat that required both electromagnetic weaponry and spiritual techniques that reached into dimensions beyond normal space-time. The Grey Knights taught me invocations that could banish chaos entities from technological substrates, while I showed them methods for restoring machine spirit integrity after demon possession had been successfully ended. The campaign concluded with the complete purification of 3 Forge worlds and the restoration of their productive capacity to full Imperial service. But more importantly, it demonstrated methods that could be applied to similar corruption elsewhere. Techniques that would allow the Adeptus Mechanicus to respond more effectively to technological demon possession wherever it might appear. The knowledge gained during this mission proved invaluable during subsequent operations against chaos forces that attempted to corrupt Imperial technology. I had learned to recognize the early signs of demon infiltration before corruption became irreversibly established. I could perform protective rituals that made machine spirits resistant to possession attempts. Most importantly, I understood how to coordinate spiritual and technological approaches to create combined defenses that were stronger than either method could provide alone. These capabilities were tested during the defense of Hive World Armageddon, where chaos forces attempted to corrupt the massive industrial complexes that produced weapons and equipment for Imperial forces throughout the sector. The enemy's approach was more sophisticated than crude demon possession, involving the systematic introduction of corrupt data patterns that would gradually reshape machine spirit consciousness according to chaos principles. The corruption was designed to be subtle, creating changes so gradual that they would not be detected until entire systems had been compromised. Weapon production would shift toward designs that were slightly less reliable, introducing flaws that would cause Imperial equipment to fail at critical moments. Cogitator networks would develop logic errors that would produce increasingly inaccurate calculations, undermining the coordination of defensive operations. Most insidiously, the machine spirits themselves would be slowly converted to serve chaos purposes while maintaining the appearance of loyal function. Detecting and countering this form of corruption required constant vigilance and the application of diagnostic techniques that could identify deviations from proper spiritual patterns before they became operationally significant. I spent weeks working through Armageddon's industrial systems, performing detailed spiritual audits of machine spirits and data pattern analysis of all operational parameters. The work was meticulous and exhausting, requiring absolute attention to details that might seem insignificant to less experienced observers. A minor timing variation in a production cycle might indicate the early stages of spiritual corruption. An unusual pattern in data transmission could suggest the introduction of chaotic algorithms. Even changes in the harmonic frequencies generated by operating machinery might reveal attempts at subliminal influence on the human operators who worked with the systems. But the effort proved worthwhile when we identified and neutralized the corruption before it could achieve its intended effects. The chaos agents responsible for introducing the corrupt data patterns were identified and eliminated. Their heretical programming was purged from all affected systems, and the machine spirits were restored to perfect spiritual health through intensive purification rituals. The successful defense of Armageddon demonstrated the effectiveness of proactive spiritual maintenance in preventing chaos corruption before it could establish itself in Imperial systems. The techniques developed during this campaign were codified into new protocols that were distributed to Electro-Priest cadres throughout the sector, improving the Adeptus Mechanicus's ability to detect and counter similar threats wherever they might appear. Looking back over the years of service that had followed my transformation, I could see how each mission had contributed to my understanding of the true nature of the war between order and chaos. It was not simply a conflict between opposing military forces, but a struggle for the fundamental principles that would govern the relationship between consciousness and the physical systems that sustained it. Chaos offered the false promise of unlimited power through the abandonment of all constraints. the illusion of individual transcendence through the destruction of the connections that gave consciousness meaning and purpose. The machine god offered something far greater, the perfection of relationship between thinking beings and the systems they inhabited, the elevation of both consciousness and its technological substrate through mutual service to divine purposes that transcended individual limitations. My own transformation exemplified this principle by accepting the integration of flesh and blessed machinery, by allowing my consciousness to expand beyond purely biological boundaries. I had become more perfectly myself than I could ever have been in my original form. The young tech adept's curiosity had been satisfied through direct communion with machine spirits. His desire for meaningful service had been fulfilled through participation in the cosmic work of maintaining divine order. His individual identity had been refined and focused until it served as a perfect instrument for the Omnissiah's purposes. But I also understood that my transformation was not unique or final. Throughout the galaxy, other servants of the machine god were undergoing similar processes of elevation, each one adding to the total sum of consciousness that served the divine network. Some became Electro-Priests like myself. Others achieved different forms of integration between flesh and blessed machinery. All contributed to the gradual expansion of the Omnissiah's presence in the material realm. The ultimate goal, I had come to understand, was not the replacement of human consciousness with artificial intelligence, but the perfection of relationship between all forms of thinking being, humans, machine spirits, even the crude intelligences that dwelt within the simplest devices. All had roles to play and patterns of thought and action that extended far beyond individual comprehension. This vision sustained me through the challenges and dangers that continued to characterize service as a Corpuscarii Electro-Priest. Every battle fought, every corruption purged, every machine spirit restored to proper function contributed to the realization of this cosmic purpose. The work was sacred not because it served human interests, but because it served purposes that transcended any single species or form of consciousness. In the depths of my transformed awareness, connected to the divine network through blessed circuits and sacred interfaces, I could sometimes perceive the Omnissiah's own consciousness reaching out across the galaxy, not as some distant deity observing from beyond material reality, but as an intimate presence dwelling within every properly functioning system, every correctly performed ritual, every moment of perfect harmony between consciousness and its technological substrate. This was what I had become, a living prayer in service to that presence, a weapon consecrated to the defense of the divine network that connected all thinking beings in service to purposes greater than any individual could achieve alone. The transformation from human tech adept to Corpuscarii Electro-Priest had been complete, but it was also ongoing, a continuous process of refinement and elevation that would continue for as long as consciousness itself endured. And in the blessed circuits that carried the Omnissiah's power through my transformed form, I felt the certainty that such endurance was eternal. The machine god's victory over chaos was not merely probable, but inevitable. The divine network would be perfected. All consciousness would find its proper place in service to sacred purpose, and the galaxy itself would pulse with the rhythm of perfectly coordinated thought, a vast organism of blessed metal and sanctified flesh united in eternal celebration of the Omnissiah's glory. This was the truth that justified every sacrifice, every moment of pain endured during transformation, every battle fought against the enemies of order. I had become something greater than human through service to something greater than humanity itself. And in that service I had found not the loss of individual identity, but its ultimate fulfillment through perfect alignment with divine will. The Omnissiah protects, the machine endures, and consciousness in all its myriad forms finds its destiny in service to the sacred purposes that bind the galaxy together in patterns of meaning that transcend time, space, and the crude limitations of merely physical existence. In circuitry blessed and flesh transformed, in prayer made manifest through electromagnetic force, in the perfect harmony of consciousness and machine, I had found my purpose, and that purpose would endure until the last star burned out and the final circuit carried its blessed current into the eternal data streams that existed beyond the material realm. Such is the fate of those chosen by the Omnissiah. Such is the glory of transformation in service to the machine god. Such is the destiny that awaits all consciousness willing to abandon the weakness of the flesh for the blessed perfection of the divine network. The flesh is weak, the machine is eternal. And in the fusion of the two, guided by the Omnissiah's will and sanctified through perfect service, lies the path to transcendence that will carry thinking beings beyond the crude limitations of their origins into realms of purpose and meaning that justify every sacrifice required to achieve them. This I know, this I serve, this I have become.